Channel 8 News presents the Nebraska First Congressional Debate, sponsored by AARP Nebraska.
Hello, and thank you for joining us for the KLKN Congressional District 1 debate between Patty Brooks and Mike Flood. I'm Ogallala native Emma Crabb, a senior at the College of Journalism and Mass Communications at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Debate is the bedrock of the democratic process, and we are proud to be hosting tonight's event live from Harold and Marian Anderson Hall at the UNL campus. This debate is brought to you commercial-free through the support of AARP. Please help me welcome KLKN anchor and tonight's moderator, Rod Fowler.
All right, Emma, thank you so much. Great job, by the way. Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this special congressional debate, a chance for you to really meet the candidates, find out how they stand on certain issues. Can't believe the November elections are just around the corner. This is their last scheduled debate, so we're very proud and honored that they picked KLKN to do this. As Emma mentioned, we're coming to you live from Anderson Hall on the UNL campus. As you can see, we have a live audience here, and we have asked them to refrain from cheering and clapping during the debate, except for two times. At the end, when we thank our candidates, and now when we get ready to welcome our candidates. So what do you say, gang? I think they are ready. So we're ready to introduce you formally here. On the Democratic ticket, we do have State Senator Patty Brooks of Lincoln. On the Republican side, former State Senator and now Congressman Mike Flood of Norfolk. As many of you know, Mr. Flood won the special election earlier this year after Jeff Fortenberry stepped down, so that's where we are now. It's a new ball game here with the election just 35 days away. So again, thank you both for being here. We appreciate that.
Thank you very much for having us.
Cool.
As far as the questions go, we're going to keep it pretty simple. The first segment of questions, you're going to have 2-minute responses each, and then we're going to have some questions where you have 1-minute response time. We don't have any rebuttals per se inside the program here, but by all means, if we get to an issue where we need to explain a little bit more, have you guys explain, or if you want to respond to something your opponent said, we'll give them more time, okay? So we're on the same page there, right?
Sounds good.
Okay, well, we flipped a coin. We wanted to make this official. In fact, people from your both campaigns were witnesses for that. We flipped a coin to see who would go first with opening and closing statements. Opening statements are going to be a minute each, closing statements 2 minutes each. So Patty, we begin with you. You have 1 minute for your opening statement.
Thank you, Rod, and thank you to KLKN and the fabulous young students at the UNL College of Journalism, and also thank you, Nebraskans, for tuning in. I want you to remember 3 things from this debate. Number 1, I am the only candidate that will fight for women's reproductive rights and birth control. Number 2, I am the only candidate not taking corporate PAC dollars. I will not be beholden to special interests, only to you, my fellow Nebraskans. And number 3, I initiated my campaign and have worked the entire time to fight for bipartisanship, to work across the aisle, to try to get to heal the political divide in this country. And we know it's affecting things like inflation and solving major problems. So I promise to do that. Finally, I want to tell you that in the last 2 debates, there were multiple misstatements by my opponent, and I'm going to be issuing a flood alert tonight whenever he makes a statement that is false.
All right, thank you, Senator. Congressman, your 1-minute opening remarks.
Well, thank you, Rod. Thanks to KLKN and the University of Nebraska for hosting us, and to those of you watching it tonight, thank you as well. As I travel the state, I talk to Nebraskans in the 1st Congressional District, and every time I talk, there's a recurring theme. America is not on the right track. We're in a recession. Inflation is at a 10 or 40-year high. There's a crisis on our southern border, and crime is increasing, including right here in the city of Lincoln. Who do we have to thank for this mess? It's the Democrats and their one-party control in Washington. Now, she's going to spend tonight trying to distract you from her partisan left-wing record in the Nebraska legislature. The choice, though, is very clear. If you believe that America should stay in the status quo, if you believe that Nancy Pelosi should be the Speaker of the House, then by all means, vote for my opponent. If you want a change in America's direction, then I'd be honored to have your vote. Thank you, Rod. I look forward to the discussion.
Let's get it started here. We're going to start our 2-minute responses for the questions we have. Congresswoman, we're going to start with you. You get the first question here. Inflation is the worst in decades, as you have mentioned. Interest rates keep going up. Is raising the federal interest rate the right thing to do? what else needs to be done to slow down inflation? Again, you have 2 minutes.
Well, Americans are dealing with higher prices at the grocery store, supply chain issues. Gas has been out of control this year. There's a lot of families in this state that didn't even get to go on a vacation because gas was almost at $5 a gallon. And what did our president do? He went over to Saudi Arabia on a bended knee to beg the oil barons over there for more production. We need to stop the reckless spending. Just last month, Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats in Congress, and it was supported by my opponent, spent another $500 billion on environmental big government giveaways. Not everybody wants to drive a Tesla. We can't afford the out-of-control spending that is taking us down a very bad path. I talk to Nebraskans every single day. People that say, I used to have more money at the end of the month. Last year at this time, I looked at my bank balance and I had $400 in my account. This year, $150. Things are getting tough out there for a lot of families. It starts with stopping the out-of-control spending. It moves to finding a way to make America energy independent. We can't be begging Saudi Arabia for lower gas prices. We have the ability to do that right here in the domestic United States. The first thing Joe Biden did was stop the drilling permits. We have to get our refineries going again. We have to get America back on top and energy independent so that we aren't beholden to foreign interests. It's costing us a lot of money. The amount of money the federal government's printed and put into circulation has delivered the highest inflation in 40 years. And Rod, you mentioned interest rates. Because of that inflation, you can't even buy a house for a lot of middle-income people anymore because the monthly payment is just too high.
Senator Pansy Brooks, 2 minutes.
I have at least 3 flood alerts there. I am not the most liberal. That's number one. You can check out that I've passed over 60 bills in a bipartisan manner. Another flood alert is that President Biden has stopped drilling. That's just not so. He's issued more drilling permits than any president in recent history. Also, my opponent continues to talk about stopping the reckless spending, but offers no suggestions on how to do that. Some of the things that I think that we need to do are lower the premiums on the Affordable Care Act. We also must work to lower prescription drugs. This past act that was the Inflation Reduction Act that my opponent voted against and didn't offer an amendment to help say what he would do to help inflation. He's just voting no to everything, straight down the line, as his party bosses are demanding. He has voted straight down the line the entire way through. So we have got to do better. We've got to work across this aisle. I've seen none of that on his behalf, and we must work for the American people. My opponent also said that he would have voted against the Infrastructure Act. There is not one single thing that would help our communities, and especially our rural communities, to thrive more than the infrastructure bill, which fixes roads and bridges and airports and makes sure that broadband is accessible and vibrant across our state. So it's great to hear all of this that is going wrong. Tell me what you would do to make it right and how to fix it, because I've got ideas, and so far you have not given us any.
Rod, I'd like to make a quick
30
rebuttal.
30 seconds each.
I think it's important that my opponent understand that Nancy Pelosi passed a rule on the Inflation Expansion Act that actually said there were to be no amendments. So I couldn't offer one if I wanted because the Speaker of the House stopped it. Second, in that bill, there was funding for 87,000 new IRS agents, which you support, going after the middle class and their money. We can't afford this in America. That bill had hundreds of billions of dollars for big energy giveaways for renewable projects that would make it more expensive to have reliable and affordable energy. So what she's saying is absolutely not true.
Senator, 30 seconds.
Thank you. First off, he says it's the middle class, so he must be counting $400,000 income as middle class, because that is the level that anybody is going to be paying on this. It's for people with more money to be paying for the dollars that we have to spend. So that's wrong, number one. Number two, he's talking about big energy giveaways, and what it does is it helps our Nebraska farmers. Our Nebraska farmers are some of the most efficient at being stewards of the land and protecting our water and protecting our drainage and irrigation. And there are points in that bill that allow them to get benefits and incentives to continue that work to help them grow and thrive.
All right, let's get back to the 2-minute response to questions here. The first one is going to go to State Senator Pansy Brooks. Everybody has interest in keeping more money in their pockets, right? What policies would you put in place to help keep more of what we earn?
We have to look at, we definitely have to look at our taxes and look at our property taxes. In the Nebraska legislature, I voted to decrease corporate taxes and income taxes. So we must look at that, but that's a federal and state level issue. So, and also we need to look at student loans. We need to look at everything that is affecting Americans' pocketbooks right now. And there are a number of different things. So, and I just think that it's, also, I just want to remind everybody, did you know that he voted against birth control? Just have to add that back into this. But I want to say that there are so many ways for us to move forward in a bipartisan manner, to get people together, to work to fight for Medicare and Social Security that's supposed to be pretty depleted in 7 years. So we have got to do what we can to bring the country together. No one party and no one person has all of the answers. We must work together. We must find ways to protect the expectations of our seniors that they've paid into for years and generations, and we must work in the future to make sure that we are protecting those dollars.
Representative Flood, 2 minutes.
Well, thanks for your question, Rod. And just to repeat it, the question is, how would you work to reduce the burden on families so they could keep more of the money that they have?
Right.
Well, that starts with reducing taxes. In 2017, Congress passed a tax reduction plan that did inject more energy into the economy, and America's economy was never better. When Joe Biden took over, you started to see the price of gas inch up, the rising inflation, and the government spending was a part of it. And so at times you have to look at bills in Congress and say, it would be nice to have that, but we can't afford it right now. That's what we do in the Nebraska legislature. We balance our budget. We do everything we can to make sure that we're funding the core responsibilities of government. That's why I voted this year for the National Defense Authorization Act. I want a strong military, but we can't go around funding every single one of these bills. And right now, with Democrats solidly in control, the spending is excessive and it's reckless and it's dangerous, and the national debt is growing. I think about my 16 and my 13-year-old sons, and I think, how's their generation going to be able to afford all of the debt payments that are going to come due as they grow older while we have this reckless spending in Congress? The other thing I want to add is energy independence. We need to make sure that we're creating energy and that we are taking advantage of our natural resources to have domestic oil production, to make sure that we have the ability to use the natural gas that our country's been blessed with. I'm focused on the middle class. She always brings up corporate income tax cuts. I think we need to focus on the middle class and make sure that people that oftentimes are both working, they're struggling to get by, we need to make it easier for them. And at the end of the day, I look forward to talking about student loans. I hope there's a question about that because people need to know where we stand.
And we do, in fact, have a question coming up a little later on that. If I didn't mention this before, I'll say it now. A lot of our questions came in from our viewers. They submitted them, and this is one of them. The Supreme Court's decision this year on Roe v. Wade was, of course, big national news. Juanita from Lincoln, she asked, what specific restrictions do you support for abortion, and do you support restrictions on birth control? And Congressman Flood, you go first.
Well, thank you very much, Rod. As a member of the legislature in 2011, I introduced and passed the nation's first 20-week abortion restrictions. I believe in common sense abortion restrictions. I believe that when we work together, I was able to get a bipartisan bill passed with 44 out of the 49 state senators in the Nebraska legislature, and it's never been challenged. Today, this is the standard that we're talking about around the United States. I also want to make it clear that I have always believed that life begins at conception. That is a personal belief that means a lot to me. But as we look at creating and crafting a policy for the state of Nebraska, I would say that we have to be open, and I would support an exception, obviously, for the life and the health of the mother, which I have always supported, but also in cases of rape and incest. I think we have to, as Americans, look at what we can accomplish with reasonable abortion restrictions in the United States. There are countries around the world that do not allow abortions after 20 weeks. My opponent's position on this issue is extreme. She favors taxpayer-funded abortions, dismemberment abortions, late-term abortions, abortions up unto the hour of birth. That's extreme, and that's not where Nebraskans are. That's not where Americans are. That is out of bounds. And so as a member of Congress, I feel that we should have reasonable, common sense abortion regulations, and I am not against birth control. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much.
Senator, you have 2 minutes.
Well, this is all a new tune to me because he voted against birth control, and he continues to bring up the 2011 work and conveniently forgets 2022, this past year, when he co-sponsored one of the most draconian bills against abortion. It did not provide for an exception for rape or incest. He knows that. He has voted against birth control. So this is all just, again, a flood alert. I want to tell you that he continues to misstate my views. I have never said abortion at any time. What I believe in is basically what Roe set forth, the age of viability balanced against the health of the mother. That's what Roe stated. So that has been understood in our country as around 20 weeks. And if the life of the mother at 30 weeks is at risk, then decisions have to be made. And we as women should not have my opponent making these decisions about what will happen to our health care, our bodily autonomy, and how we will move forward. And which is it? Which Mike Flood do we have right now? The one that believes in birth control or doesn't believe in birth control? The one that believes in not allowing birth control or not allowing an abortion for rape and incest, or the one that just said he does believe in that? So it's very confusing. He's not voted that way in any of his votes in Congress to date. And so it's quite clear to me and to other Americans who care about reproductive rights that he's talking out of both sides of his mouth. You cannot trust what he is saying right now because he's spoken both ways. And which is it?
And I think this is probably one of those that because it's such a hot topic and emotional, give you each 30 seconds.
Well, first of all, let's talk about the birth control issue. There was a bill in Congress that specifically had several different topics in it, one of which was birth control. But it basically said that if you were a doctor, you had a statutory obligation to prescribe birth control, and if you didn't, it would create a private cause of action against the doctor. I don't believe the government should force doctors against even their medical judgment or their religious beliefs to prescribe birth control. That's what she's talking about. In the Nebraska legislature, in fact, just 2 years ago, I voted on a bill that would allow women to get not just 1 month of birth control, but 6 months of birth control when they were prescribed it by their doctors. I'm not against birth control. And so I don't want to overrun my time. I have plenty more to say here. She has misstated my position on that.
And Senator, you get the last 30 seconds on this subject.
Thank you. And he also voted to go after doctors who perform abortions and made it so that people can't cross state lines to go get health care. And so we all know about people going to the Mayo Clinic for second opinions. And this is egregious, it's wrong, it's draconian, and we must rise up and say no more. These men are not in control of our bodies and our reproductive rights.
Our next question, Patty, you will have the first 2 minutes on this. Are we strict enough on gun laws? For what reason should people be allowed to possess a semi-automatic rifle? You have 2 minutes.
Are you talking about an AK? What are you talking about? An
Well, I
AR-15?
think that's the big, the one that's in the news the
Okay.
most here recently.
Well,
AR.
Pardon me?
AR.
Yeah,
AR.
that's why I said
An
AR.
AR,
Yeah, AR-15. Okay, there goes 15 seconds. But anyway, so what I want you to know is that I believe in reasonable common sense gun laws. I believe in background checks. I believe in red flag laws, so that if somebody is a family member is concerned about another family member and thinks that that family member should not be carrying a weapon, then I think that they should be able to petition the court, and so should the police. And my opponent has voted against the concealed carry ban that the police were supporting because that was for permitless carry and carrying weapons without training. So as far as the AR-15s, I do not think children need to be carrying those. I think that there need to be reasonable gun restrictions and age limits. And if an 18-year-old wants to carry an AR-15, please sign up for the military. We need them. We need a voluntary, fabulous draft of people. But again, remember that not everybody who signs up for the military is accepted, and not everybody who has signed up for the military is allowed to carry a weapon of war like that. So again, we have to find reasonable restrictions. We have to move forward and protect our communities. My opponent wants to arm the teachers in our schools, and that's one of his solutions to gun violence in this country. The teachers do not want to be armed. They do not want to be carrying weapons. And we must make better determination on how to best protect our citizens. He's voted against the police 5 of 6 bills while in Congress. 5 of 6 bills that the police supported, he voted against. More on that later.
Mike, 2 minutes on this.
Well, I'll start with, I'm proud to be the only candidate in this race that has the support of the Lincoln Police Union, the state fraternal order of police, and law enforcement officers, and almost every sheriff in the 1st Congressional District. Let's talk about the Second Amendment. She wants to talk about restricting gun use. There is an amendment that protects the citizens from its own government. It's the Second Amendment, which is the right to bear arms. I do not support infringing upon the rights of lawful Nebraska citizens, gun owners, that want to exercise their right under the Second Amendment to own a gun. We have to talk about mass shootings. We have to talk about school security. I am for making improvements to schools, elementary schools, preschools, K-12, post-secondary educational facilities to make sure that we have the brick and mortar improvements that we need to make sure those places are safe. But what she's leaving out, and what I want to really emphasize, is that we have a mental health issue in the United States. We started deinstitutionalizing people, which had a lot of benefits, but we do not have enough capacity for long-term, locked, secure care. We have fewer beds at the regional center today than we had 20 years ago. Like 10% of the capacity we used to have is now available. If you are homicidal, if you are suicidal, and you cannot be treated effectively in the community, we have to make sure that we have the resources at the state level to make sure that you have a locked, secure care environment until your mental health improves or you are not a danger to society. I have more to say on this topic, but I want to respect the time limits and look forward to the discussion.
Okay, appreciate that. Let's move on.
I had a couple things on that to respond.
Okay, let's do it just for these first few, but,
Okay.
we want to get to as many topics as possible.
Okay, thank you. So, I support the Second Amendment. I support my family who hunt and use guns in a reasonable way or who want to protect their homes. Antonin Scalia said, the conservative Justice Scalia said, not every gun in every place at every time. So my opponent just talked about mental health, and he voted against mental health for the school teachers in the schools, and he voted against mental health dollars to help the police. There is only one police department with a mental health program in Nebraska.
30 seconds.
The NRA looked at both of our records. They offered to do interviews. They grade us on a report card. I got an A. Patty Pansy Brooks got an F. That tells you where she stands with gun owners in the state of Nebraska. The other thing I would tell you is that as it relates to arming teachers, I said that is up to the local school board. And if the local school board decides that history teacher, who is also an off-duty police officer, can carry during the day, if the superintendent and the school board agree, then it's permitted. So I think it's important to clarify that. Thank you.
Our next question comes from Pamela from Lincoln, and she says, do you support equal rights for LGBTQ plus members of Nebraska when it comes to housing, labor, and marriage? You both have 2 minutes. Mike, we start with you.
Earlier this year, we took a vote in the United States Congress, and I believe that Nancy Pelosi engaged in fear-mongering and hateful tactics to try and divide America. The reality is that in 2014, the Supreme Court of the United States held that that gay marriage was to be permitted. They specifically found that it was a constitutional right. In 2022, June, the Dobbs decision comes out. In that decision, Justice Alito wrote the concurring opinion that 4 other justices also signed in on, so a majority of those on the court, that basically said that nothing in the Dobbs decision in any way disturbs, conflicts, or renders moot the 2014 decision that created same-sex marriage opportunities in the United States. So let's be very clear. Gay marriage is not under assault or attack in the United States. There was one justice in a concurring opinion that stated this. But the other justices and the majority of the court clearly said that the 2014 gay marriage decision was not overturned. You can't get more clear than that. And I think it's important that we have that as the baseline. I, as a member of the legislature, believe that the state should decide issues as it relates to marriage. That's one of the reasons I voted against that bill. We have decided what the rules are in marriage, our entire history as a state. It is clearly constitutional. There is no attack on gay marriage. It is the law of the land. And I think that's important to be stated, and I thank you for the time.
Senator, 2 minutes.
Wow. Well, first off, the Casey decision in the 90s also said that Roe v. Wade was affirmed. So we know that just because a couple of justices said, oh, there's no problem with the rest of the rights that are under the 14th Amendment, including the right to same-sex marriage, the right to interracial marriage, the right to birth control, we know all of these rights that are under the 14th Amendment, right to privacy, are at risk. So whatever he says is not true. And we know that it's at risk, and people are worried and scared. I have a gay son. We've advised him to marry as soon as possible. He has a fabulous young man he's dated for 6 years. They should get married and do it as soon as possible, even if we can't all be there. And I just, I brought for 5 years straight, 6 out of my 8 years, I brought the LGBTQ workforce equity bill to try to bring it to make sure that people are not discriminated against in their jobs because of the picture that's on their desk. And year after year after year, that was denied. People said, oh, well, it's infringing on my religion. I'll tell you what, the #1 issue for the state chamber and for the local chambers is workforce development. We raise these kids into fabulous human beings. My son's working for the Department of Defense and things I can't know about, and neither can you. But he's protecting our country. And he could be doing it at Stratcom, but instead he's in D.C. because of the safety here, because he doesn't feel safe for his partner or for him here. So whatever Mike wants to say, he wouldn't sign my resolution to acknowledge the decision in Obergefell in the state legislature. So I have no idea what he's talking about. He voted against interracial marriage. He voted against same-sex marriage in the Congress this year.
All right, let's move on. Todd from Lincoln, he asks, the crisis along our southern border continues to grow. What will you do to secure the U.S. border? Patty, we begin with you with 2 minutes on this one.
Thank you. We have to make sure that our border is more secure. We have to make sure that people are there and that the police and the sheriffs and the Border Patrol officers have the support that they need. We continue to hear that they don't, and we have to do better. Again, I've read the conservative Cato Institute has a study, and my opponent will talk about the fentanyl, and yes, the fentanyl is terrible, but do you realize that the Cato Institute studied and found out that 75% of the fentanyl that is coming across our borders is coming from U.S. citizens? U.S. citizens. And secondly, 90%, they found that 90% of the drugs that are coming in across our borders are coming in at the ports of entry. Not down the river. He wants to spend trillions of dollars to build a bridge. And then what have we done about the fact that these ports of call have significant issues that we have got to do better solving these immigration issues? The second thing is workforce development. The number one issue, again, of the chambers is workforce development. And so we need people here. We have to do better with our dreamers, our DACA kids who were born and raised here, who worked and are paying taxes here in our country. And they are providing the workforce that we need in this state. And you don't see the chambers arguing against immigration because they know full well we need the people here. We need to prioritize people with special skills that we need. And we need to do a better job of recognizing and bringing people of value instead of dehumanizing and villainizing every single person that lives across our border and is trying to come to this bright, shiny tower on the hill.
Congressman, 2 minutes on this.
Just over a month ago, I went to the southern border, and I'm the only of the two candidates up here that has. And I saw for myself the humanitarian crisis that is happening on our southern border. Under the Biden administration, the policy has been when the illegal immigrants are taken into custody, they're processed for 5 days, and then they're given a court date 5 years down the road, and they're welcome into the American society. More of our Border Patrol agents are now required to be working in processing centers than in the enforcement function that they signed up for. And meanwhile, what's happened? The word's gone out. The drug cartels, which are massive criminal organizations, are making billions of dollars taking money from people from India, Romania, Afghanistan, Peru, El Salvador, $5,000 to $8,000 a person. They bring them up to the border, they get them across the border, and then they go to a stash house. What happens next? They get extorted for their sexual services or for more hard labor in different places across America. It's not right for them. And those are the ones that make it. I talked to a rancher who had 15 dead bodies on his place in the last 2 years. That's the kind of crisis we're dealing with. So what do we need to do? We need to make sure we're enforcing the law. We need to pass a bill that makes illegal immigrants coming to this country remain in Mexico while their application is pending. We need to build the wall. We need to include the fiber optic technology for detection, and we need to increase lighting so that Border Patrol agents can get up and down the border effectively. I do believe that we should also make sure that we're timely processing visa applications. In January, there was a 500,000 visa backlog. Today, there's a 380,000 visa backlog. It needs to be more efficient. But in the end of the day, we have a crisis down there, and it needs to get solved.
Congressman, we start with you on this next 2-minute response for this question. What do you think should be done about the war in Ukraine and the threats from Russia so far? Should we continue spending or sending billions of dollars to help Ukraine fight the war?
I do support arming the Ukrainians, making sure that they have access to the best weapons technologies. Vladimir Putin is a killer. He is destructive. I believe in American world leadership. I believe that the American military preserves our peace every day, and that countries like China and Russia are a direct threat to our homeland and to our way of life. We've also made a commitment to our NATO allies in Europe to be there in the event the invasion steps into NATO territory. I believe that it's in everyone's best interest that Vladimir Putin be stopped, and I am just so grateful for the leadership of President Zelensky and everything that's happened in Ukraine, the courage they have showed, the Americans, the world leaders they've inspired to stand and fight against this Russian oppression. Vladimir Putin is trying to convince the people of his own country that the Nazis have taken over Ukraine. He's gaslighting. he's dangerous, but most importantly, he's desperate. We need to make sure that the might of the American military is ready to act in the event something really horrible happens. We cannot afford a fight on this front with a world power that has nuclear weapons. We need to stop it in its tracks. And for that reason, I do support providing weapons. I also think that it's important that as a country, we stand strong with our NATO allies, and I think in the last year we've seen a resurgence of strength in NATO, which is good for the world and it's good for American homeland security. So yes, I do support what we're doing in Ukraine.
Senator Pansy Brooks, 2 minutes.
Thank you. First off, I need to circle back because my opponent does not believe in a path to citizenship for immigrants, and I do, so I just want to make that clear. I think it's wrong. We have to work towards a path to citizenship to make sure that we can bring these fabulous people to work in our communities and make a difference in our economy. I also support the impact that we're having on Ukraine. The economic sanctions are working. We know that Russia has gone in with soldiers at gunpoint to make people vote that they want to secede from the Ukraine. We see that kind of fear-mongering, and we see what they're doing to impose their autocracy and authoritarian regime on other governments. We've got to do what we can to protect our democracies across the world. We have to do what we can with NATO. We have to make sure that NATO is keeping up to speed with what we're doing and that they are supporting monetarily at the same rate that we are. But we cannot do it alone, and we have got to walk that tight balance between going in boots on the ground World War III and making sure that we are a strong enough entity with NATO to push Putin back and his terrible ways. Thank you.
All right, well, that's going to do it for our 2-minute questions. Now we're going to do the 1-minute response for the question. So we're kind of just a mindset that you might need. Just do a little bit faster so we can get a lot of these in. Patty, we're going to start with you. Again, 1-minute response. Dan from Lincoln, do you support the voter ID ballot initiative that we're going to vote on in November? Why or why not?
Thank you for that question, Dan. I do not support voter ID. I think it's a solution without a problem. And we know that even in the past election, former Vice President Pence certified the election, and former Attorney General Bill Barr said that there was no election fraud. So again, we have had research. We have had all sorts of institutions searching to see if there was fraud. And the problem with voter ID is that it is more difficult on minorities, on people with disabilities, and on our seniors. And just as a quick example, my mom lived with us the last 10 years of her life, and she quit driving, but we had to go get an ID. It didn't have to do with voting, but the process of getting her to the place to get an ID, to go through the whole process, was very cumbersome, and we will be stopping seniors from being able to vote. I'm against it.
Mike, 1 minute.
I support the voter ID proposal. I signed the petition, and I have advocated strongly for it in the Nebraska legislature. Our democracy depends on our institutions. One of those important institutions is the idea that people vote and that they elect their leaders. If we don't underpin the institution with confidence, if Americans and Nebraskans don't have confidence in our election system, we don't have a country, we don't have a democracy, and we don't have freedom. And so at the end of the day, I 100% agree with voter ID. When I go to the swimming pool and check out a locker, I give my ID. When I get on an airplane, I give my ID. When I go down to the library to open an account, I give my ID. I've given my ID different places today. It's something that we all are accustomed to doing. It's not too much to ask, and a free and fair election system is on the table.
And Congressman, you'll start us off on this next one. If elected, how would you lower prescription drug prices for all Americans? 1 minute.
Well, first and foremost, I think we need transparency in our healthcare system so that Americans know exactly what's going on. I do not support pharmacy benefit manager programs. In fact, in the legislature, we became one of the first states to really start looking under the covers to make sure that pharmacies in Nebraska weren't being unduly audited and more costs were being added onto that. One of the things that you're going to hear from my opponent is that she wants to cap the spending or to cap the price on certain drugs. And that's socialist. Let me tell you, this is the government saying, well, we've got to keep the costs down on certain drugs. What about when the government says we have to keep houses affordable? So we're going to make sure your house doesn't go above $225,000. We can't price fix in America because if we do, we lose access to life-saving cures. Companies will not do the research and investment necessary to find the next life-saving cure.
Senator?
Thank you. First off, of course, another flood alert. He's putting words in my mouth. But we must allow companies to negotiate with the pharmaceutical companies. For some reason in this country, we've allowed the pharmaceutical companies to remain premier and unassailable, able to choose to charge whatever they want to charge. It doesn't make sense. That's not part of a capitalist economy. And so if we have to put caps at some point, these are not low caps like $20 on something. These are reasonable caps that don't overspend, that don't make it so that seniors and veterans and children do not get the health care benefits that they need because the drugs are so expensive. So we need a bipartisan group to get together, to work it through, to get the best ideas for the American people and for our health care industry. Right now, we know it's broken.
Can I have a response?
15 seconds, yeah.
Okay, there's a difference between price fixing and negotiating. And what she's talking about is price fixing. And in her mind, she will decide what's reasonable because she wants to do that on behalf of the U.S. government. That's dangerous and it's socialist.
15, just to wrap it up.
Another flood alert. I don't think I ever said I want to fix any certain kinds of price fixes. So again, I'm talking about reasonable people getting together from both sides and making decisions for the American people.
Next question. Would you support any changes to Social Security and Medicare to make sure they're available for future generations? Patty, 1 minute.
Thank you. I do not, well, yes, I do support changes to Social Security and Medicare. We must fund Social Security and Medicare. These are promises to our seniors. They have been depended upon for generations, and we must, again, bring a bipartisan group together. If there's fraud, I've heard some people think there's fraud in what's been happening, but we cannot privatize Social Security or Medicare, and we cannot cut it. And I will promise the seniors that I will not privatize or cut Medicare or Social Security. We have got to do our best to figure out the best ways to fund it. There are numerous ideas out there on the table. Not all of them are good. But again, not one single person or my opponent and his party bosses have all the ideas. We've got to work together, come across the aisle. This is a complicated issue, and we must protect our seniors.
Mike, 1 minute.
I support keeping our promises, Social Security, Medicare. At the end of the day, people work their entire lives and they expect Social Security to be there for them upon their retirement or upon the appropriate age. We have to make sure that it's there. It's a promise with the American people that must be kept. Medicare is also very important. Access to health care for our seniors is important. We have to make sure that we're being as efficient as possible, but more than anything, that our seniors are getting the best care possible. And I support access to critical access hospitals. I support the improved use of telemedicine, especially in rural areas. But I also believe there's a bigger issue out there, and that is there are a lot of Nebraskans that are suffering from severe loneliness. And I think this leads to anxiety, poor health outcomes, and crisis intervention that costs more money. I think as a nation, we need to be looking at ways that we can work on prevention to get somebody's diabetes under control before something bad happens.
Congressman, you'll have the first 1 minute response to this next question. Everywhere we look, we seem to see help wanted signs, right? What would you do to bring Americans back to the workforce? 1 minute.
Well, first and foremost, we need to keep Nebraskans in Nebraska, and that means we have to have good paying jobs, we have to have good quality of life in our communities, and we have to make sure there's a direct pipeline between educational institutions, whether that's a high school senior or a college junior, college senior, working in internships. That's why last session I passed a bill that put $20 million into a fund that essentially links employers with those students, whether it be at the high school or at the college level. We have to make sure that community college is affordable so that those students that want to go and get a technical degree have that ability to do that. And we have to just continue to push employers to make sure that we're paying at or above market so that we have good paying jobs for those that want them. Workforce is a key issue of mine. It's something that I've focused on as a state senator, and I have a really good record on the issue. Thank you.
Senator, 1 minute.
Thank you. I too have a great record on it. I've been working on workforce development my whole 8 years in the Nebraska legislature. We need to have good paying jobs, that's correct. The minimum wage issue is on the ballot. And we have to work on affordable housing and make sure that affordable housing is available in our small rural communities. We must do better. We need to provide incentives for students so that they'll be encouraged to move to areas that are depopulating. The rural areas around our state are at real risk right now. We need to support the hospitals. We need to support young people going to those areas and providing health care and other skilled positions so that those communities don't die on the vine. In addition, we have to make sure that we are providing broadband across the state. And we have to change the paradigm so that communities are in charge and not the carriers. We need to work better together.
And Senator, you'll have 1 minute to first respond to this next question. William from Lincoln says, which presidential candidate won the 2020 election?
Clearly, President Biden won the presidential election. Thank you, William, for that question.
And Mike?
Joe Biden is the President of the United States. He was duly elected.
I think, obviously the background of that question was with some people saying that there was fraud and all that kind of stuff. Anything you want to believe? Do you believe in any of that, or is it, don't want to comment?
At the end of the day, I'm focused on 2022, and I'm hopeful that in 2024 we can help box up Joe Biden's things and move a Republican president into the White House. And it's my hope that we have a Republican Congress and a Republican White House so that we can get America back on track.
15 seconds if you want to add anything, or you want to move on.
My opponent wants, he keeps talking about changing the one-party system, but it's just changing it over to his party. So that's not my goal. My goal is to work across the aisle, find people of goodwill to solve the problems like inflation and all of the significant problems that are going on in our country today. Together, we can do this. Together, we are better.
Mike Flood, we're going to start with you on this one. America has never been this divisive in decades. What needs to be done to get America back together? It's kind of a double-edged question. How do we prevent another January 6th? So I think it might, all kind of bind together there.
It starts by sending good people to Congress. It starts by electing good people to the legislature. As a member of the legislature, I worked for 10 years there, and I was the Speaker of the legislature for 6. I have a very bipartisan record. I have worked across the aisle very effectively for over 10 years. And as a member of Congress, my first priority was to go to the bipartisan prayer breakfast each week, and I haven't missed one yet. And I shared this with my opponent last week. I respect her. I respect the fact that she cares so deeply about this, that she's running for this, and I know she believes in all of her heart in the things that she says. She's raised a beautiful family. We may look like opponents, but at the end of the day, we're both Americans. We both love America, and we are up here tonight because we want to do the best job we can representing the people of the 1st Congressional District. We have 2 very different paths on how to do that, but that's the freedom that we're guaranteed as Americans that we all can enjoy tonight.
Patty Pansy Brooks, 1 minute.
When you think of the anger is usually based in fear. So we need to recognize that when people are angry in our country, what's behind that is fear. Fear that our country, that our people are no longer working together. We have got to understand that we are not each other's enemies. We are each other's colleagues, family, friends, and neighbors. And you know, Republican President Ronald Reagan said that the person who disagrees with me 20% of the time is my ally and my friend, and not a 20% traitor. We have to work together and help people to understand that reaching across the aisle is not sinful or horrible or anything that we shouldn't do. We should not be marching lockstep with the parties on either side. We should be working together and coming across the aisle, as we do in the Nebraska legislature, our nonpartisan unicameral that is so special. We need to be able to work across that aisle and care for one another, care for all Nebraskans and Americans.
We only have time for a couple more questions before we get to closing statements. Patty, we start with you. Do you agree with tuition forgiveness? We said earlier we're going to talk about this.
What I think about tuition forgiveness is it's a very, very difficult issue. And yes, I think we have to do something about tuition. My opponent will say, oh, well, she just wants the electricians and the plumbers to pay for the lawyers. That's not true. There is a wage limit on who gets these. We're talking about two different kinds of loans. There are the federal loans that are tied to Pell Grants. Right now, Pell Grants are at $6,500. When they first started, they paid for 80% of a student's education. They now cover about 28% of a student's education. That is abysmal. And then we look back to the fact that the past 2 years, we had the pandemic, and we've had terrible inflation. And so what's happened is that just like the businesses that had to have loans forgiven, the PPP loans, my opponent took almost $1 million. Our law firm also took money. But I'm not going to say that we deserved it because we worked harder, but those students don't deserve a hand up, that they don't deserve help in going to school and creating an economy that will move forward.
1 minute, Mike.
Well, thank you very much for the question. No, I do not support paying down the college debt of PhDs, lawyers, and doctors on the backs of waitresses, plumbers, and electricians. I don't think that's right. I think it's wrong. I think it's bad for America. If you take out a loan, you have to pay it back. Now, if you took out a loan, you spent too much money on college, or maybe the college gouged you wherever you are in America, then that's something we need to look at to make sure that people aren't being taken advantage of. Here in Nebraska, we have the lowest amount of student debt of most states in the nation. We're not at the bottom, but we are pretty low on student debt. It just doesn't pass the smell test. You notice when she was asked the question, my opponent said, well, that's complicated. She didn't answer your question, Rod. She punted the question. My answer to you is very clear. I do not support the college debt forgiveness program.
15 seconds each on that.
Okay, thank you. As I spoke before, this is a flood alert. There are wage limits on when somebody's loan can be forgiven. They're not forgiving the loans of doctors and PhDs and physicians. They're forgiving the loans of lower individuals, of Pell Grant individuals who are making far less money. So he is completely wrong on that, and he knows it.
15 seconds.
I don't know what this flood alert business is. It's kind of a neat gimmick. My first dog was named Flash Flood, so it makes me smile that you came up with that. But again, she didn't answer the question. She said it was complicated.
And I think getting close to our last 1 minute response question, what should Congress do to improve farm profits, in Nebraska being such an ag state? And we begin with Mike on this one.
I'm very proud to be the only candidate in this race that has the support of the Nebraska Farm Bureau. We have to start with getting the EPA out of the business of farmers. Now they're trying to regulate use of atrazine, which has been used effectively and it's science-based. Now the Biden administration wants to get rid of it. The second thing we have to do is get the federal government away from feedlots. I am on the House Oversight and Reform Committee, and AOC and a bunch of other Democrat congresswomen and men from either coast are doing everything they can to make it impossible to run a feedlot with more than 170 cows. That would destroy the 1st Congressional District. That would hurt Cumming County. That would hurt Seward County. The third thing we have to do is we have to eliminate as much as we can the red tape and bring down the tax burden. We also have to protect the exemption for federal estate tax. It is it would kill family farms to have to pay a tax rate that we used to see 20 years ago, and I'm pleased with where the exemption is right now.
Patty, 1 minute.
We must work to help the small farmers in our communities across this state. And, one of the things that we have to be concerned about is the fact that our self-defense is at risk. There are four major pork-producing companies. Two of them are China, and that's Smithfield, and JBF, which is from Brazil, a corrupt company. We've got to do what we can to make sure that as mergers happen, our national defense is not at risk. It is a deep concern, and I want to raise that alert to everybody. We've got to help the rural areas. We have to help them grow. We know farmers are the best stewards of the land. We have to provide incentives to them so that they will continue to use their best practices to protect the soils. I co-sponsored a bill with conservative Senator Gragert on healthy soils and protection of water. I will continue to do that work to protect against climate change and work for our country.
Really quick rebuttal, if I may.
15 seconds, real quick.
In 2015, she essentially called Nebraska farmers concerned about property taxes whiners. She basically said, I don't know why you're all complaining about that. It must be that you just don't want to pay your taxes. She's out of sync with rural Nebraska.
15 seconds.
I've never voted against the farmers, and people who know me know I have a sense of humor, and probably I said it in a way I shouldn't have, but it's clear I've been voting and supporting farmers since day one and will continue to. They are the backbone of our communities.
Well, that is going to do it for our question and answer segment, and it's time now for closing statements. And again, we flipped a coin on this, and Patty, you'll go first. You have 2 minutes to let people know why they should vote for you next month.
Thank you. Nebraskans, I'm grateful for this time that you listened. I'm grateful to the students for doing this. This was a lot of work on their behalf, and I'm very grateful. As you've heard, you have to determine who you trust in this election. Do you trust my opponent, Mike Flood, or do you trust me? My opponent was quite able to work across the aisle when he was first in the Nebraska legislature, but that was over 10 years ago when he did that. When he came back, he wasn't able to work across the aisle. So what I will say to you as women, who can you trust? Who will you trust to fight for your reproductive rights, for your birth control, for your ability not to have my opponent, Mike Flood, walk into your exam room with 2 police officers to determine what you are doing, whether you're having an abortion for an ectopic pregnancy that could kill you. And we have got to move forward. He wants to go forward and have a child who's raped or a child who's a victim of incest to be forced to go to term. That is not the American way. Secondly, students, who do you trust? You've just heard he won't support anything about your loans, although within the past 2 years, he's taken almost $1 million worth of loan forgiveness from the federal government. Who do you trust? Teachers, you've heard he wants to he wants to have guns in the schools. How safe is that? As a 5'5" woman with a senior who's 6'3", you think that's going to be safe in the schools? It's not. Police, he voted against 5 out of the 6 bills. We're planning on going back to the police to say, are you sure you want to stick with what you decided? Because he's just voted against mental health help for you. And Nebraskans, who do you support? Who do you think who can you trust? Who is going to either vote straight down the line or work across the aisle to protect your interests here in Nebraska? Thank you for tonight.
Congressman, you have the final 2 minutes.
Thank you, Rod. Thanks to KLKN and to the University of Nebraska for hosting us here tonight. And to those of you watching, thank you very much for spending time with us. Well, just as I predicted, my opponent spent the better part of this hour trying to distract you from her own left-wing liberal record. If she goes to Washington, she'll support the same bad policies and failed politicians that got us into this mess. In fact, if she goes to Washington, she'll be a Pelosi puppet. Her first vote will be to elect Nancy Pelosi as Speaker of the House, and then she'll get right in line with all the other Democrats, just like she has done in the last 8 years in the Nebraska legislature, where as a member of that body, she voted to increase taxes, she worked against tax reform, she's worked to reduce prison time for violent felons, child abusers, and sex offenders. On the border, she supports methamphetamine, and she's voted to give taxpayer benefits to illegal immigrants. If she goes to Washington, she'll be right in line with all the other out-of-control spenders, and to fund it, she supports 87,500 more IRS agents to get your money. We can't afford Patty Pansing Pelosi in Washington. That's why I'm running. I want to reduce taxes. I want to cut spending. I want to make sure that you keep more of the money you earn. I'm also focused on protecting your personal freedoms and working to find American energy independence to bring down gas prices. That's what people are talking about: inflation, the cost of gas, groceries, the supply chain. At the end of the day, I look forward to earning your vote. I want to end with this. May God bless you. May God bless the state of Nebraska. May God bless the United States of America.
Well, we have filled an hour, believe it or not, that quickly. It is time to say goodbye. Thank you to the candidates. Thank you to UNL for hosting. And thank you for watching. Thanks to our crowd. How about a round of applause?
Hey, Patty.